As we discussed on Monday's show, the so-called conflict between Israel and Palestine is back in the news. That's principally because of an attack that killed 7 Israelis in an illegal settlement last Friday. The deaths of Palestinians, of course, don't usually generate many headlines in and of themselves. On LBC this week, the Palestinian ambassador to the UK, Hussam Zomlot, expertly exposed that hypocrisy.
It's telling that we haven't met for a year now. It is really rather telling that we only meet when there are Israeli casualties, always. It tells you all you need to know that some consider Palestinian lives to be less important, different blood. Last year was absolutely awful. 230 Palestinians, mostly civilians, children, women, teachers, taxi drivers, were shot by the Israeli army. This month alone, 35. And the raid in Jenin that was not mentioned in the introduction is what really got the situation into a new level of confrontations.
But you would accept that all of these are sort of retaliations from one side or the other?
You said something very interesting. You said we need to discuss this in a cool manner. Let's do that. Let's unpack this. You said the two sides always blame each other as if we have discussed this long ago. Well, this is part of the problem. The problem is the two-sidism. The problem is this false parallels between an occupied and an occupier, a colonized and a colonizer, a besieged and a besieger. In no way we can claim or even begin to discuss when we think that there are two sides. This whole thing is about an aggression on the top of an aggression on the top of another aggression that has lasted for 100 years. 55 years of military occupation, and that is the biggest aggression of all, because that robs you of your national collective rights, denies you your basic rights, controls every aspect of who you are, where you live, where you work, and decides to kill you at will at any point in time, raid your refugee camp. That is another aggression which happened some 75 years ago, the Nakba, the wholesale ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. Then you go to the refugee camps, wreak havoc at will in the middle of the night under the pretext that you have information. You kill 9 or 10 in Jenin refugee camp, and then you send the whole thing into a new level of confrontation.
Now, I think that was such an important intervention there. And, I'm sure, I don't think Ian Dale seriously thought that what he was doing was trying to minimize the lives of Palestinians. I think he probably does look at the, as I say, so-called conflict. You'll see why I'm saying that in a moment. But the so-called conflict between Israel and Palestine, I think he probably does see it as a conflict between two sides. You've got the Palestinians who kill some Israelis, and the Israelis retaliate by killing some Palestinians, and the Palestinians retaliate by killing some Israelis. Seeing it like that, there's just this cycle of violence. Someone needs to break the cycle of violence so everyone can come together. Now, what that ignores is that, especially the violence we've been seeing over the past few weeks, we need to say where that's been happening, right? That's all been happening on occupied land which is internationally recognized as being under military occupation. Now, sometimes you'll speak to people who are, very anti-Zionist, and they'll say all of Israel is occupied. I'm going to remain sort of on the fence on that one. Everyone agrees that East Jerusalem is under military occupation. That's international law. That's the UN. Basically, everyone recognizes that, right? And if you abstract from the fact that all of these deaths are happening in occupied territory, then of course it just seems like, oh, one side killed one side, then the other side killed that side, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the way to make this really clear why this is wrong is if you look at Ukraine, right? So if someone said to you, oh yeah, the Russians have killed some Ukrainians, but last week some Ukrainians killed some Russians, the week before some Russians killed some Ukrainians, there's a cycle of violence going on in Ukraine at the moment. And what does that ignore? The fact that the Russians invaded Ukraine and all of those deaths are happening in occupied Ukraine, right? So the context of this violence is that one state is occupying another state. And that's the same in East Jerusalem. It's the same in the West Bank. It's the same in Gaza. One state is occupying another state. So you can't just say there are clashes. There is a conflict here. There is an occupation. And when one country occupies another country, what happens? Yeah, you get really brutal, horrible violence. That's what happens when you occupy a country, or like Russia, when you invade a country, right? So if you abstract from that, you are just not being honest about what the real story is. And again, to go back to Ukraine and Russia, if you were to have someone saying, oh yeah, the Russians killed some Ukrainians, but some Ukrainians killed some Russians, if they didn't mention the crucial context that Russia invaded Ukraine, what would they be called? Rightly, a Putin stooge, a Putin apologist. because that's obviously a misleading description of the situation. But when it comes to people dying, people getting killed, people getting violently killed in East Jerusalem, in occupied Palestine, doesn't even get mentioned, right? It's ancient hatreds between two people. No, it's one state occupying another people. So, I mean, I don't know if Ian Dale's going to learn, but it was very well put by the Palestinian ambassador. I'm quite annoyed about this today because Keir Starmer has proved just how cowardly he is when it comes to Israel. Now, this is a tweet from a journalist at the I newspaper. Keir Starmer's spokesman says Labour MP Kim Johnson's description of Israel as an apartheid state with a fascist government were unacceptable and said the chief whip will be speaking to her about the comments. Now, the comments referred to there were made by Kim Johnson at Prime Minister's questions, and they were, in fact, pretty reasonable, right? A year ago, Amnesty International declared that Israel practiced apartheid against Palestinians. Just a few months later, Human Rights Watch did the same. That was after investigating the extent of the state's racist crimes against Palestinians. A human rights group from Palestine has done the same, B'Tselem. So it seems pretty weird to call that unacceptable. What about calling the Israeli government fascist, though? Well, just like the apartheid claim, there is plenty of evidence to back Kim Johnson up. Take Itamar Ben-Gvir. He's Israel's Minister of National Security and leader of the political party Jewish Power. He entered government after Benjamin Netanyahu invited his party to join his coalition. That's despite Itamar having called for the expulsion of all Arabs from Israel, and despite him having faced dozens of charges of hate speech against Arabs. For good measure, Ben-Gvir used to hang the portrait of a man who massacred 29 Palestinians in Hebron in his living room. That all sounds a little bit fascist to me, which is why once leading figures in Israel are now using the term. Ehud Barak is a former prime minister of Israel. He recently warned that Netanyahu's government showed signs of fascism. He said Netanyahu has joined forces with racist maniacs to bring down democracy. And Barak is not the only one. The word fascist has even been used by members of Netanyahu's government themselves. Bezalel Smotrich is leader of the far-right religious Zionism party and Israel's current finance minister. A recording was recently released of him bragging that his voters don't care if he's a homophobe or, yes, a fascist. Yet despite this wealth of evidence, Kim Johnson still delivered this apology to the House of Commons.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would like to apologise unreservedly for the intemperate language that I used during PMQs. I was wrong to use the term fascist in relation to the Israeli government and understand why this was particularly insensitive given the history of the State of Israel. And while there are far-right elements in the government, I recognise that the use of the term in this context was wrong. I would also like to apologise for the use of the term apartheid state. While I was quoting accurately Amnesty's description, I recognise this is insensitive and I'd like to withdraw it.
While I was quoting Amnesty International's opinion accurately, it was insensitive and I would like to withdraw it. Have you ever heard a more stupid phrase uttered in the House of Commons? I mean, there have been lots of stupid phrases uttered in the House of Commons, but so a human rights organisation have said that a government is committing apartheid, but to say that in the House of Commons is insensitive in case you offend someone, right? A state is committing apartheid. It's been recognized by Amnesty International, by Human Rights Watch, by B'Tselem, which is a leading Israeli human rights organization. But to admit that in Parliament, your job is as a representative. This is not you can imagine, you're around a dinner table, right? You're around a dinner table with some family members who are really keen on Israel. Now, maybe talking about Israeli apartheid would be a bit insensitive because you'd cause a row. Maybe it'd upset your grandma or whoever's sitting around the table, right? I can see that. This is not a dinner party. This is Parliament. This is Parliament where you're supposed to have MPs saying true things, talking about outrages that are going on in this country or in the world. But this one, you stand up and you say, there's a human rights organization which has said this government is doing this appalling thing. Oh, we can't say that. It's a little bit insensitive. And we're in such a topsy-turvy world that it's seen as normal for someone to say, yes, this is true. Yes, this was accurate, but it was insensitive, so I withdraw it. Now, that should be, you should have lobby journalists asking questions. This seems a bit weird, doesn't it? That this MP has had to apologize for something, even though it was true. Isn't this a bit weird? Why did that have to happen? That's not what lobby journalists do. What lobby journalists do is go, ha, 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 yeah, Keir Starmer showed he's a real leader. He's put the left back in their place. He's told someone that because they were standing up for a brutalized people, they have to literally deny the truth in public and basically humiliate themselves just to prove that they are completely subservient to the leader of the Labour Party, who seems to be completely unwilling to upset anyone in favour of Israel, right? Or the policies of Israel. It blows my mind. And on this show, you often see, when I feel like I am softer on Keir Starmer than some people on the left, or some people on the show, we have disagreements, that's always very legitimate, is when I feel like he has stayed out of something that other people want him to get involved in. So when it comes to going on a picket line, he sees that there's this big conflict between trade unions and the government. Now, I think it's sort of fair enough to say, look, this big conflict is going on, doesn't really benefit me or my party to get involved, doesn't really benefit the trade unionists, to be honest, if I get that involved. So I'm going to stay out of this. Now, if he wants to stay out of it, fine. But what I hate about this is he's not staying out of it, right? If he wants to say, look, there is the Israelis are completely abusing the Palestinians, but this is not going to be how I win the next election, I'm going to stay out of this one for now. Fine. But no, he's actively getting involved and actively saying that anyone that says the truth about Palestine has to publicly apologize and humiliate themselves, or presumably they'll be kicked out of the party. Now, if Keir Starmer wants to shut up about Israel and Palestine, fine. But if you're going to speak on something, don't lie. And I think even worse than lying is banning other people from telling the truth. That's just disgusting. And it speaks so badly of Keir Starmer. It speaks so badly of the Labour Party. I also think it speaks so badly of journalism in this country, because I haven't seen a single journalist say, this is a bit weird. Why has this MP been forced to apologise for saying something which even she admits is true? No one has said that. All they've said is just like, oh, isn't this Keir Starmer being decisive? Because research to them just means quote tweeting Margaret Hodge, right? No one's bothered to read the report by Amnesty International. No one's bothered to read the report by Human Rights Watch, by B'Tselem. No one's bothered to look into who sits in the Israeli government. All they say is, oh, Margaret Hodge is upset. Oh, and Keir Starmer's not like Jeremy Corbyn. He's going to take tough action. Like, how stupid can you be? And it does matter, because it just shows, I think, how racist this is as well, because you are literally allowed to make people apologize for telling the truth about a group of people being oppressed because we consider them less important than the group oppressing them.